Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackson, and I'm a senior and a student researcher at Monte Vista Christian School in Watsonville, California. Today, I'll be sharing with you my research, which is based on to what degree is spider silk a better alternative to conventional graft in ligament reconstruction surgery. And then I'd also like to acknowledge my mentor, Alexander or Alex Dawes, who guided me throughout this whole process. All right, so why I chose this topic is because ACL injuries are rising in young athletes. They're becoming increasingly common, especially among young athletes, with the incidence rising nearly 26% in the past 15 years. The current graft options, which are autografts and allografts, still fill up to 40% of the time, which leaves many athletes unable to return to their sport. On a personal level, I've gone through surgery myself as an athlete, so I know how critical reliable surgical methods and treatments are. And I've also seen my teammates suffer ACL tears, and I've even seen them re-tear them after surgery. Watching that struggle firsthand, it sort of gave me a sense of purpose to pursue this research in order to look into stronger and more durable graft materials, which can improve recovery and help athletes perform at their best. As I mentioned earlier, ACL injuries are on the rise, especially in young athletes. They're very common in contact and pivot heavy sports, such as football, basketball, and soccer. Younger athletes face an even higher risk because their developing bodies make the ligament more vulnerable to tearing. Currently, the common gold standard treatment in surgical reconstruction either uses autografts or allografts. Autografts are where tissue is taken from the patient's own body, usually from the patellar tendon or hamstring, while autografts are from donor tissues taken from another person. Even with these approaches, only about half of athletes are able to return to their pre-injury level of play, which highlights the need for stronger and more durable graft options. So why spider silk? Spider silk has fascinated scientists for decades because of its remarkable and crazy properties. By weight, it's actually stronger than steel, and it's also highly stretchable and tough, which are exactly the qualities you want in a ligament replacement. The problem is that natural spider silk isn't practical to use. Spiders are territorial and cannibalistic, which means that you can't farm them how you farm silkworms for silk. Collecting the silk from spiders is incredibly inefficient and unsustainable, which is why researchers have turned to synthetic spider silk. By using lab-made hydrogel fibers, which mimic the natural structure of silk, we can reproduce its properties in a scalable and biocompatible way. This opens the door to using it as a graft material in ACL reconstruction. So my approach was to conduct a systematic literature review. I focused on studies from PubMed and Google Scholar that look specifically at synthetic spider silk. And in order to be included, the studies had to meet three key criteria. First, they needed to provide detailed biomechanical data, such as tensile strength and stretchability. Second, the fabrication methods had to be clearly explained so that the data was reliable. Third, the material had to be feasible for use in the body, which means that it was made from a biocompatible material such as hydrogels. Once I gathered these studies, I compared the synthetic spider silk to two widely used graft types, which is the bone tendon patellar bone graft, or the BTB graft, and the ligament augmentation reconstruction system synthetic graft, or the LARS graft. The synthetic spider silk that I focused on was made from ion-doped and twisted hydrogel fibers. Its properties are pretty remarkable. It has a tensile strength of 895 megapascals, which is in the range of titanium and stainless steel. This means it can withstand extremely high loads. Its stretchability is 43.3%, which means it can elongate almost 43% of its resting length before it breaks. It also has a very high stiffness, or also known scientifically as Young's modulus, of 28.7 gigapascals, This high stiffness helps to stabilize the joint and make it more secure. And at the same time, it has a toughness of 370 megajoules per cubic meter. This shows that it can absorb a very high amount of energy before fracturing. And finally, its dampening capacity is 95%, which means it can dissipate all the mechanical energy which is placed upon it. These biomechanical metrics are very important because ligaments face thousands of repeated cycles of stress every day. Together, these properties suggest that synthetic spider silk could be extremely durable, which makes it a strong candidate for use in ACL reconstruction. Next, I want to talk about the properties of the BTB graft. It's one of the most common options used in ACL reconstruction, but when we compare its properties to synthetic spider silk, it pales in comparison. Its tensile strength is only 33 megapascals compared to 895 in spider silk. And its stretchability is also much lower at just 11%. The stiffness or Young's modulus is between 225 and 338 megapascals, which is much lower than spider silk's 28.7 gigapascals. And importantly, the toughness and dampening capacities are not reported in literature. This creates a big knowledge gap, and because without these values, it's difficult to fully assess how well this graft performs under repeated or multi-directional stresses. The Lars graft is a synthetic option made from polyester fibers. Its tensile strength is reported at around 117 megapascals, which is higher than the BTB graft, but it's still far below the synthetic spider silk. However, a big issue with the Lars graft is that all the other important biomechanical properties that I've mentioned before are not reported. This makes it very hard to fully evaluate its performance under real world stresses. And clinically, the Lars graft has shown some advantages compared to the common bone-to-bone graft, such as faster recovery and shorter surgical times, but studies report mechanical failure rates of about 1/3, or 33%, and 40% of patients are unable to return to their previous level of sport. So here's how these graphs compare side by side. You can see synthetic spider silk pretty clearly stands out. With the tensile strength of 895 megapascals, it's about 26 times stronger than the bone-to-bone graft, bone patellar tendon bone graft, and nearly 8 times as strong as the Lars graft. It also has a far greater stretchability, toughness, and dampening capacity, which aren't even fully reported for the other grafts. The BTB graft, while commonly used, is very weak by comparison and has significant failure rates. The Lars graft offers better strength than the bone-to-bone graft, or BTB graft, but it still falls short of spider silk, and it lacks critical biomechanical data. The takeaway that we see from this comparison is that spider silk not only outperforms the existing grafts, but it also has numbers that we don't have in other grafts, or we haven't measured or reported them yet. So when we break down these comparisons, it's pretty obvious. Like I mentioned before, synthetic spider silk is 26 times stronger than the BTB graft. It's also 3.8 times more stretchable, which means it can handle much higher forces and deform more before breaking. Like I said again, compared to the Lars graft, it's almost 8 times stronger, and it also has key properties such as toughness, dampening capacity, which the Lars doesn't report. This missing biomechanical data is a very important limitation because it prevents us from fully evaluating their performance in real-world application. In contrast, synthetic spider silk provides a much more complete profile. Because of its high toughness, dampening capacity, it provides very high fatigue resistance and energy absorption, both of which are critical for ligaments that undergo thousands of loading cycles per day, such as walking, running, and jumping. However, there are still limitations that need to be mentioned. To date, synthetic spider silk still hasn't been tested in vivo or clinical trials. So we don't know how it will behave in the human body. Sorry if you can hear me. Um, its immune response and biodegradability and integration with tissues are still untested. That said, I think successful integration is very likely because synthetic spider silks are made from hydrogels. Hydrogels are already used widely in other medical technologies, such as scaffolds and blood, and are considered biocompatible. Another limitation that we have is the lack of biomechanical data for the current grafts themselves. As I mentioned before, studies often report the tensile strength, but they rarely measure toughness, damping capacity, or stretchability, which makes a fair comparison between grafts difficult. Finally, there's no standardized testing protocols for graft materials. So until these gaps are addressed, it's hard to fully prove that synthetic spider silk's clinical potential. In conclusion, ACL injuries are continuing to rise, especially among young athletes, and current grafts have very limited success. Only about half of athletes are able to return to their pre-injury level of play. Yeah. And synthetic spider silk shows superior biomechanical properties to what we currently use. It's stronger, tougher, more stretchable, more fatigue resistant than the commonly used BTB graft and the synthetic Lars graft. Because it's made of hydrogels, which are already used in medical technologies, it's also very likely to be biocompatible. That said, we still need in vivo testing, clinical trials, and standardized biomechanical metrics to truly evaluate its long-term potential. Overall, synthetic spider silk shows great promise as a next-generation graft material, and I believe it can help athletes return to their sport with greater confidence and reliability in the future. Thank you.
Yay, great job, great job. Um, I am based in Denver, Colorado. And so, in ski country, I feel like this is so relevant, and ACL tears are always a popular injury and big concern. Um, and I also just can't believe how strong the synthetic spider silk is. Like that slide blew me away. That's crazy. Yeah. Um, I know there's a question in the chat. One quick one that I had for you though, you mentioned your mentor Alex at the beginning of the presentation. I'd love to hear a little bit like what were kind of some of the specific ways in which he guided you or like kind of impacted the project?
Yeah, so one way that I was definitely impacted by his help is that throughout my research, I sort of hit a wall in my research because I was researching these different properties and I noticed that there's very limited research on the biomechanical properties. And I was sort of worried because I felt like I was unable to make a fair comparison or make an accurate comparison between these graphs without the lack of data. Um, but where Alex really helped me is he sort of allowed me to, or helped me reframe what my research was about. And instead of like searching and trying to make up data, um, through like math, statistics, and physics, he sort of helped me reframe my research to find out or to describe the like lack of literature that's out there and why that's sort of concerning. Because I think personally, I in my past I played baseball and I tore my UCL, which is my tendon in my elbow. And before I got surgery, I really wanted to make sure like the graft that I was receiving was the right one for me. And it was sort of difficult because of the lack of data to truly assess like what was the right graft for me. So, um, yeah, I think in the future it's really important for more trials to be done on this biomechanical data so that you're able like each demographic is able to make a better educated choice on what they want in their surgery.
Amazing, amazing. I'll read out the question that's in the chat. You showed that spider silk is stronger and more stretchable than current grafts, but ligaments also need to handle repetitive stress and integrate with the body. Did any of the studies you reviewed test spider silk under real life conditions like long-term use in living tissue? Um, which I think this was one of my questions for you too, because you kind of mentioned at the end, right? It hasn't been in the body, but I'm curious too, like in anything that you read, is that something that's going to change? Is anyone kind of pushing for that to be a study that's done?
Yeah, so from what I've read is that I've seen people are concerned with this issue that the current gold standard of grafts is not sufficient. Um, And what I've read is that not necessarily the specific compound that I researched, which is synthetic silk created from ion doped and twisted hydrogel fibers. However, there are research and in vivo trials being done on different compounds in order to assess different compounds like feasibility in the body. If that answers the question.
All right, very cool. All right, wonderful. Well, Jackson, thank you so much.